everybody, and welcome. So I know the course slide here is not the same as what you guys saw. We said Web Forms does modern web application development, and I have building mobile websites using Web Forms, Bootstrap, and HTML5. The reason why is this is the name of the course that I've created for Pluralsight. So a little about me. I'm Paul Sheriff. I'm the CEO of PDSA Incorporated. We're a custom software development shop in Southern California, and we also provide virtual CIO and CTO services. You can check us out at pdsaservices.com. We also sell some developer tools, so take a look at those. We use these every day in our consulting practice, and I know they'd help you too. I've also authored 6 Pluralsight courses, and today's little webinar is kind of an extract from my newest one. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about these, the first one here, which is modern web apps using Web Forms and Visual Studio, but there are a lot of other great modules in this course. We have creating horizontal navigation, creating sidebar navigation, creating forms over data pages, and then building standard business forms. All of this is part of this new course. It's about 4.5 hours. And during that time, I show you that Web Forms can do everything MVC can do. All right, so you don't have to learn MVC to be able to program these modern websites. You already have experience with Web Forms, so why not take advantage of it? So you can check out my new course on Pluralsight, and I hope you will. I think it's a good one. It's actually rated number 23 as of today, so I guess a lot of other people think it's pretty good as well. All right, today, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to go into some HTML5 features that are available in Visual Studio. I'm going to be using Visual Studio 2013, but most of these features you could get with the service pack in Visual Studio 2010 even. So, in fact, everything I'm going to do today will also work in Visual Studio 2012, guaranteed. So we'll talk about Web Forms TextBox control and the different HTML5 input types available there and how to use the HTML5 attributes as well. I'll talk about using jQuery specifically with the client ID mode. We're going to talk about ViewState, how we can disable it, and even store the ViewState on the server. And then we're going to take a look at friendly URLs, how you can use the same type of friendly URLs that are available in MVC. Now, we're going to do the Q&A at the end, so what I'll do is if you chat in your questions to me, hopefully I'll answer them during the presentation, but if not, I will reserve about 15 minutes at the end for a little bit of Q&A. Now, this, I think Lindsay talked about the slides already, but the sample code that I'm going to go through is available when you go and sign up with Pluralsight, and then you can download it right from my course. All right, so let's start out. So Visual Studio and HTML5. Ever since Visual Studio 2012, really, there's been great support. There was good support in Visual Studio 2010. What's neat about this is Visual Studio 2013 and 2012 allow you to specify what validation to use for the HTML. So if you want to keep working in HTML4, you can get the IntelliSense and the syntax checking for that within the editor. Or you can switch to the new HTML5, which I would highly recommend everybody do. What it does displays the HTML errors in the editor then. Now, with Visual Studio 2013, it's even better because the IntelliSense got much better for HTML5 and CSS3. They also have built-in snippets now, so we can, kind of type in an element. It'll close the element correctly, even add some of the attributes in certain cases. Now, let's talk about the HTML5 input types, right? Input type equals text was kind of a catch-all. But now they have the new types that help with formatting, display, and validation available in HTML5, such as date, date-time, time, week, month, email, URL, search, number, range, telephone, and color. So typically in a regular HTML snippet, you would do input type equals tel, input type equals email. And again, I want to encourage you to start using these now because even if the browser doesn't support these, it will just default to input type equals text. But where these really help out are on a mobile phone. If you have input type equals tel, the mobile phone will bring up the telephone keypad. Makes it easier for the user to do data entry. Same thing with an email. It'll typically bring up the email keyboard so you don't have to type in .com. Hopefully they have the keyboard that has the .com all in one. Now, we can use these various input types with the ASP.NET text box as well. You basically just set the text mode. And again, Visual Studio will bring up IntelliSense with all of the different text modes, and you can set it to phone or email or URL, etc. And it will then translate it to the appropriate one when it generates the HTML5. HTML5 also introduced a lot of new attributes, such as autofocus, required, placeholder, form no validate, min-max, step, and pattern and title. So a lot of these new attributes are disabled for field set element as well. Now, a lot of these attributes work, but unfortunately, Microsoft did not add them to the ASP.NET text box in IntelliSense. So you have to know what to put in them, but when you put them in, they will still work. So not a big deal, but it does mean that we don't have as much help there as we normally do. All right, so let's drop down and take a look at a little demo. So I do have a few samples here, and just to start out, let's go ahead and create a new web form here, and call it Web Form 1, just so we can take a look at how to do this in practice. So I'm going to bring up the toolbox, and I'm going to go grab a text box here and throw it right there. Now, if we were to then bring up our properties window, I'm going to press F4 here, and we look at the properties window here, and we draw all the way down to the text mode. That's where we generally would set things like single line, multi-line, or password. That's what we had prior to 2010. Well, now, as you can see, this has grown quite a bit. So all of the normal HTML5 input types are there. Now, they did change them a little bit. So instead of TEL, as it is in HTML5, they called it phone. So they tried to make it a little more descriptive. All right, but it will translate to TEL when it generates the HTML. By the way, you can also get the same IntelliSense here in the editor. So kind of nice that we've got all of these things available to us. Okay? So we can do like email. All right. Now, the other thing that I mentioned was one of the things we can do is we can use some of the new attributes. Now, let's do this real quick. I'm going to go ahead and type in input, type equals, and then we'll just do like telephone. Okay. Now, we do have some of the attributes like required. Okay, so you'd say required equals required. Autofocus, okay, equals autofocus. All right, so you saw the autocomplete as well was there, right? You typically want to set this off if you're doing something like a credit card number, right? You don't want somebody to autocomplete that anymore. You're telling the browser, hey, don't save this information. Okay, so lots of great things here that we can take advantage of. So they're all here in the IntelliSense here. The problem is when you're in an ASP.NET server control, you don't get them here. Okay, you don't get autofocus. However, you can still type it in. Okay, so I wanted to show you this because sometimes you might want to actually keep an input type just around and hidden somewhere. So you might do a type of hidden here, right? So you can try out what are all these, different attributes. Okay, grab them here and then just simply copy and paste them right in to your text box. That might be a good way to go. All right, so HTML5 input types, HTML5 attributes, perfectly good with web forms, all right? So, it's not that, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with MVC. It's just that a lot of us have a ton of ASP.NET web forms applications, and we don't want to have to rewrite them, or sometimes you don't want to have to go through the learning curve. You got way too much on your plate at this point. So for me, it's like, let's take advantage of all the things that are in web forms. Now, another thing I wanted to show you before we even go on with the rest of this stuff is I'm going to bring up a brand new instance of Visual Studio 2013. Now, if you haven't upgraded to 2013, I would highly recommend it. What we find is that now, before there used to be all these templates for, MVC and all these templates for web forms and based on what you were doing. Well, now it's just one single thing. I'm going to create an ASP.NET web application. When you click OK, you can choose a template then. Do you want to do web forms? Do you want to do MVC? Are you going to do a web API? Or you can just do empty. What's very interesting about this, though, is look down here. You can add folders and the references for all of them. Okay, so this means we can use web forms and MVC all together, okay, in the same project. And this means that you're allowed to, even in your existing ASP.NET application, bring in MVC. So that's really neat. So if you wanted to keep the rest of your site in web forms, but maybe update 1 or 2 pages, or maybe you've got some new functionality you want to add on and you want to take this opportunity to learn MVC, you can now do that. But what I wanted to show you is that when you come in and build something with web forms and you click on OK in 2013, what we find is that they've made it very consistent with what is in MVC. Okay, Microsoft has this new ASP.NET, 1. It's like the one vision, one thing to do. And if you look at things, we have things like bundling. Okay, so bundling is now available in web forms. Okay, because remember, everything's using the same underlying engine, whether you're using ASP.NET Web Forms or MVC. Identity service is there, friendly URLs, okay, all the new, ASP.NET Identity, all there. So this is all available to you, whether you're doing MVC or web forms. All right. Now, what I've done here is I do have kind of a whole list here of input types. And I wanted to show you a little bit something about this because when I'm running on Windows 8.1, and so I'm on Internet Explorer 11. So here's the search, and all it does is add an X. Okay. Email, it checks for valid email format. Okay, now this is nice. So it won't even let me submit the form unless I put something valid in. Okay. URL does check for a valid URL format. Now, date time or date, some browsers actually show a date time picker. Of course, Internet Explorer doesn't, right? Okay, the range generally displays some sort of slider. Okay, the color will be like a drop-down. So that's Internet Explorer. But if we switch over to something like Chrome and we run this exact same sample, we'll see a slightly different experience. And this is why I always recommend we should start using some of this stuff right now. So look at the date picker here. Okay, it actually does have a little drop-down for us, okay, on Chrome. Okay, for months, we do have a little drop-down where it can actually, you can pick a whole month. Notice how it highlights the whole month here. Okay. Week, same thing. Time, same thing. The range has a little slider. Okay, we get a color picker in Chrome. So a lot of other browsers, if you're not using IE, are a lot better. Okay? Actually, the best browser for HTML5 compatibility actually is Opera. Okay? For all 2 people in the world using Opera, this is great. Just kidding. Well, not really. But anyway. All right. So I've got all the various input types listed here. So, you can just go through and try each one of them out yourself by setting the text mode equal to phone, to search, to email. I would suggest you do this, try it out, see what the different experiences you get on the different browsers. So go through and install Firefox, install Chrome, install. I've even got the iPad and iPhone simulators from Electric Plum. All right, attributes, same thing. We've got tons of attributes here, and again, you'll get different experiences on different browsers. All right, so here I've got. I did add a little modernizer on this particular one. Okay. But we do have different HTML5 attributes that we can add, such as autofocus, so we don't need to focus the cursor using JavaScript. This will do it for us. Okay. If we go into Chrome on this guy, I've added some placeholders. So if we take out the product name now, okay, notice how the placeholder comes up. Okay, so that's kind of nice, right, that we actually get these placeholders. And if I hover over it, I do get a little tooltip. Okay, and that's done with the title attribute that's been added. All right, so good stuff around HTML5 support. All right, and by the way, I didn't mention this, but and I didn't show it, but for CSS3, they have all the IntelliSense built in for CSS3 as well, so you can take advantage of that. Let's talk about jQuery. So one of the problems that we've traditionally had with web forms is trying to use JavaScript or jQuery, because when the web forms controls generates the HTML, it munges, that's not my word, that's actually what they call it, they munge the ID attribute. Okay, so the ID attribute would come up to something like, if you have a master page, it'd be your master page name underscore, and then the ID that you put in. So this can be a problem because in jQuery, when you want to try to select something, you're going to use a $ open parenthesis, and then you want to do a hash, and then the name of the ID. Well, you have to know what that ID is going to be. So when we try to reference that, okay, we got two choices. We can use the client-side scripting to do that. Microsoft came up with, they did this a long time ago, where they came up and gave us the actual ID, like the parent control name _ ID name. They give us that in this client ID. So all we have to do is simply use a little bit of client-side script here wherever we want to generate or use an ID. But starting with .NET 4.0, they added the client ID mode that you can now set to static. What that does is it uses then whatever ID you put in. Okay, and so then we don't have to use the script tag anymore. Now, if you have a complicated parent-child structure, this could be a little bit of an issue, because if you use the same user control more than once on the same page, you could get duplicate IDs, right? So you might want to stick with the scripting tag in some particular instances. But if you say, no, I don't do that, I just really want to use jQuery and just know what the ID is, you can set the client ID mode equal to static. This is better if you have a simple parent-child structure and you know that you have no possible way that you're going to duplicate the IDs. All right, so let's take a look at this. So, oops, I apologize. I meant to keep that one open. That was still the one I wanted to be on. All right. So I do have a sample here for that. Okay, so here I've got now an ASP.NET text box. The name, the ID is TXT product name. I have another ASP text box. The ID is TXT introduction date, and then TXT cost, etc. So when I click on this button here, see what this looks like, this add new product, what I want to do is I want to display some data, default some data, okay, on this form. And I want to do it all client-side. I don't want to do a postback. So in order to do that, I have to write a little bit of JavaScript. So I wrote a method here called addData that gets fired when this button clicks. So here is the addData method that I wrote here in JavaScript. I'm using a little bit of jQuery. And here, as you can see, I've got TXT product name, TXT introduction date, but I've wrapped it all within some client or some script server-side scripting code and grab the client ID. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look now at the source code that got generated. So let's right mouse click and say View Source. Let's bump up the font here, and we'll scroll down. So if we look down here, we can see the ID is main content, because there's a master page with a placeholder called main content _ TXT product name. Now that's different than what I named it. Okay, but if we look up here at the JavaScript, when it got generated, look what happened. The client ID said, oh, I know what it's going to be, so I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. So here's our JavaScript that went down. So everything works correctly. And that's exactly what we want. Okay? So that's one way that we can take advantage of this. However, if you say, I really want to just code my normal jQuery, I want it to look just like I was, an HTML developer, I'm doing, MVC or something like that, okay, what we can do is we can now set this new mode, client ID mode equals static. Like I said, this was introduced in .NET 4.0. Okay, so if you set this to static, now when we run this, the IDs do not get munged. So we view source, okay, we come down here, and we find that, okay, where is it? ID, TXT product name, TXT introduction date. So those did not get changed at all, and that's all because of this client ID mode that I set here. Now you can set this at almost any level. You can set it in the web.config file. Okay, so on the pages you can set it the client ID mode. Okay, so you can set it global. You can set it in your master page. You can set it at your page level. Okay, you can even set it on controls themselves. All right, so a lot of this can change. There are other modes here, but I don't have time to go into those. I do go into those in my course on Pluralsight, though. So definitely take a look at that. But what's really nice about this, if you know you're not going to have IDs that are going to duplicate, okay, then you get to use some really clean-looking JavaScript. You don't have to worry about, demunging. You don't have to worry about adding, the server tags and like that. So kind of nice. So definitely take advantage of that. It does make it a little more MVC-like, doesn't it? All right. But even in MVC, you'd have the same issue, wouldn't you? If you had a couple of different partial views, for instance, and you use the same partial view in two different areas, you're going to have a problem with IDs. So you would have to take that into account and program for that. Okay. And there are ways to do that, obviously, in MVC as well. Okay. So now let's move on to our next thing, which is ViewState. Okay. So one of the things I'm telling people these days is go ahead and disable ViewState for most of your web form pages. Okay. You're all familiar with ViewState, right? ViewState, in fact, let's go do this really quick, and let me show you. Like a grid view. A grid view is probably the worst thing. Okay, let me just make sure. I'll turn this back on. Okay, grid view probably generates more view state than anything else. So the problem with view state, right, is if I go view source now again, okay, and I look down here, look at that. Wow. Tons of stuff getting, sent down. Think about this on a mobile device. You are now burning up somebody's minutes, right? Okay, if they're accessing over the cellular network. So that's not something that we typically want to have in here. We'd like to, kind of get rid of that as much as possible. Okay? Well, one of the things we can do is we can disable the view state. Okay? We can set it to false, enable view state to false. So when we do this, what happens? Okay, well, let's go ahead and run this. Everything's still working, isn't it? Okay, so, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that one. That's a different sample. Okay, everything is still working. Okay, I didn't implement paging in this particular one, but everything would still work, okay, except for a few things. Actually, I've had that off the whole time I was running this, and you saw everything still worked when I was running this sample. Okay, most controls actually keep their view state even if they're turned off. Checkbox list, drop-down list, the checkboxes, all the HTML controls, TextBox, and grid view will maintain their state even if view state is off. Okay, but there are things that don't work when you do this. Events like text change, selected index changed won't work correctly. Auto postback equals true won't work for the first element in a drop-down. How's that for a weird bug? Okay, properties like forecolor or any label controls that you might set programmatically, okay, are not going to maintain their view state. So there are some issues when you do disable it. Like I said, you can disable it globally, like I just showed you. You can also turn it off page by page, and you can turn it off and on for each control individually. But again, my recommendation, turn it off, see what doesn't work, and then turn it back on for what you need, okay? Now, here's one of the things I wanted to show you then, is on that grid view sample, for instance. Okay? So I'm going to end this grid view. What I did is I added a select button so that I can select something. The problem is, since I turned view state off, look at that. Selected row comes back as null. So that could be an issue if you're using that code to actually grab the current row that was just selected. However, one of the things that we can do is we could actually fill in, because generally what we want to do, we want to grab the selected row and grab the primary key because we want to grab that ID so we can go to some other page. Well, one of the things you could always do is create your own little button in here, put into the command argument your primary key. So that's a way around that, okay? Now, I'm not saying you're going to do this for everything. What I'm saying is that you can get rid of a lot. You can make your pages a little bit, smaller if you disable view state globally, okay? And then turn it back on a page-by-page basis where you need it. Okay, because it definitely will reduce the amount of, stuff going down to the browser. Okay, so again, I've got it off, I believe, now. So if we view source and we look down here, yeah, much less view state than what we had before. Okay, there's still some, okay, but you're going to see it up to be a lot less. Okay, so that's still a little bit of an issue, right? Because we really want to get our web pages smaller because we're doing more mobile. People are browsing more to our websites from mobile devices. So we want to make them happy. We want to make our pages more responsive. We want them to load faster. Well, one of the things you can do is store ViewState on the server. Okay? So because of too much data getting sent across, what we can do is we can override two methods, two events in the page class. The first one is load page state from persistence medium and save page state to persistence medium. Now, I've been doing this since .NET 1.0. Okay, this has been built in forever. So you've been able to do this all along. Okay? Then you could put this data somewhere. You have to store it somewhere. Okay, you could put it in a database table. You could put it in a file, a text file on disk, okay, because reading from disk is very quick. Okay, you could use a cache object. You could put it into session. Okay, there's a few little issues here and there. If you use session, the back button might go a little wacko on you periodically, depending on what you're doing. All right, but the cache object with a sliding timeout I kind of like, because then because if you put it into session, it's going to stay there until the session dies. If you put it into a cache object with a sliding timeout, it'll go away after, maybe a minute or whatever you choose. Okay? Just use the session ID and the page name for your key so that it's unique for every user. All right, let's take a look at this one. So let's go into here. I have another page here, and it's pretty much the same one that we were just looking at. Okay, a little grid view. Okay, so we can, page through. We can do all that. We can actually store some view state and then get it back. All right, so what did I do on this? Well, one of the things that I did is in the web.config, there's nothing new. I've still got view state enabled. Okay, we won't see disable view state anywhere up here. Okay, but what I've done to make this happen, and well, actually, let me do this. Let me run it one more time and show you the view source on this. Okay, so we're looking at it here, and look at that. No view state whatsoever, but yet everything was still working, and I was still able to retrieve view state. So what did I do to actually get this to happen? Well, the first thing I did is I took away system.web.ui.page, which every page inherits from. I've been preaching this since .NET 1.0, that you should always use your own web-based page class, okay? So I created one called app-based-page right here. It simply inherits from system.web.ui.page. Okay, so everything still works exactly the same, but my page now inherits from that. So here's the code on the page where I'm actually storing something into view state, and then when I click the button, I'm retrieving it. But yet, no view state went down to the client. The reason why is because I added a property to my base page class called store view state on server, and I set it to true here in the on pre-init event. In the app-based page class then, okay, what I'm going to do is override those two events. Load page state from persistence medium and save page state to persistence medium. So here's what happens. Okay, Microsoft will pass in the state, that view state that it would normally send down. It passes it to this method first. Okay? What I do is I check my little property if store view state on server is equal to true. And if it is, I'm going to take that state, okay, build a view state key, which I'll show you how I did in a second, use that as my key into my cache, okay, and then I'm going to say, let's store this for 10 minutes, okay, or whatever. You could make it 1 minute, 2 minutes, whatever you feel is, applicable. So it now stores this into cache, okay, and then this method returns. Now, if I don't set store view state on server, I simply use whatever Microsoft's going to do, which means send it down. Okay. Then, when they say it's time to reload that page state, right, so on a post back, it needs to reload it. It calls the load page state from persistence medium. So, store view state on server. If that's true, then I use my view state key to retrieve from the cache the value. Okay, I put that into result, and that's what I then ultimately return here. Okay. Otherwise, I return whatever came back from Microsoft's typical load page state from persistence medium. So pretty simple. All I had to do was create a Boolean on this base page class, store view state on server, override the on init so that I can build a view state key, the key I'm going to use, which is the session ID for this user, okay, and the page name. So what it is, I wrote a little method down here that says, give me the page name. Okay, and I don't want the big long URL. I just grab the actual page name itself, and that becomes then the key that I use for saving and for retrieving the ViewState. So very simple little base page class. And then all you have to do is on every page that you want to take advantage of this, simply replace system.web.ui.page with app-based-page. Okay. Like I mentioned, this has been here since .NET 1.0. I mean, this is great, this ability to, override the base page class. You'll find a lot of uses for this. Okay. All right. Friendly URLs. So this is something that, everybody calls these SEO-friendly URLs. SEO doesn't really care, but whatever. Okay. But the reason we like these is that it does eliminate a lot of query string parameters, where people would do, default.aspx $ID = 3 or something like that, right? So if you had something like, your URL / products.aspx or products.aspx $product ID = 3, what friendly URLs do is by the use of this URL routing, you can actually eliminate the .aspx, and you can eliminate the question mark because you can do product /3. These two lines are then the equivalent of what we just saw up above here, right? So these guys are exactly the same. So it's kind of nice to be able to do this. It gives us a cleaner query string, I think, okay? And the user then doesn't really even know the actual page name because it doesn't have to map. I could have called products here. I could have called this Paul and still mapped it to products.aspx. So it doesn't really matter what the page name is. Then we don't know what technology we're using. I mean, every time you see a .aspx, we know it's a .NET site. This way, we don't even know what it's written in. Okay? So it makes it a little bit easier, I think, for users to use. Okay? So to do this, pretty simple. You can add this right now, okay, to your Visual Studio 2012 or 2013 projects. You just simply add in the Microsoft.asp.NET.friendlyurls DLL. Best way to do that, go to the NuGet Package Manager, do a search for Friendly URLs Core. Okay, now you don't need the full thing. Okay, if you don't want a view switcher to switch between mobile and desktop, if all you want to do is add friendly URLs, all you have to do is grab the core here. Okay, you don't need to grab everything else, so just the core will work. So do that through NuGet, okay, and that's it. Then you add a class called routeConfig, and you create a method called register routes, for instance, passing in the route collection from the global ASAX, which I'll show you about in a minute. Okay? And then you add as many routes as you want through this map page route. So here I've mapped the default.aspx to simply default. And again, that name could be whatever. I could call that Paul, and when I type in www.whatever.com/Paul, it would go to default.aspx. Okay? All right. So we have to modify the global ASAX and add a call to that register routes in our application start. Okay? What's great is when you add the friendly URLs, it adds in this, and it automatically builds a route table for us. ASP.NET will build that for us. So again, that's the ASP.NET engine used by both MVC and web forms. It's simply a static collection, okay, that's available to us. All right, let's take a look. So here I wrote this one. I've already added in the Microsoft ASP.NET friendly URLs. Okay, in the global ASAX, I added a reference to, or using, to system.web.routing. Okay, and that allows me to then access the route table.routes. And this is what's built by ASP.NET. So you can see it comes out of that namespace. Then I added my own routeConfig class here. Okay, and it has a register routes method to which I'm going to pass in that route table. I'm going to enable friendly URLs, and then I'm going to map as many things as I want. So in this project, I actually have a customers.aspx and a products.aspx. Okay, so and I have a default as well. So what I did is I mapped customers to customers.aspx. I mapped deleted customers to customers.aspx. I added another one which does a little bit of things. Says I will take a parameter here called customer ID. So inside of the curly braces says I'm a parameter here. And I'm going to map that to customers.aspx. And then I've got products and get product with the parameter coming in for product ID. Okay, so now if we start out at default, okay, so what I want to show you here, bring this down and show you side by side here. There we go. So if we look at this and I hover over this, you can see what it's going to call down below here, right? So look down here. You can see it says /products/getProduct/22. And we can see that right here on the products, getProduct/22. So your Ahrefs change a little bit, don't they? Okay? And then when I click on this, I can say this is the product page. Or if I say getProduct/22, I can actually report back that I got a 22 in. How do we do that? Well, it's pretty simple. We just simply check to see if the page.routeData.values has a key called product ID. So if that's not equal to null, then I know I've got one, and then I can go ahead and retrieve it. Now, this is very much like any other design pattern that we've done, request.queryString, for instance, right? You're always checking to see if it's there, and if it is, then you grab it, okay? So the same type of design pattern. Did the same thing on customers, okay? So I got the same design pattern here. Now, there are some other things you can do. You can say get friendly URL segments. So what it'll do is you can actually see how many segments, and that's each segment is separated by a slash. So you can find out how many are there, and then you could reference each one individually. This code here is exactly the same as this code. Okay? You can also check the friendly URL path to say, hey, how did someone come into this? Oh, they came in with deleted customers, which, if you remember, is one of the things that I set up here. And by that, it means that, oh, maybe I need to do something different. I need to pass a parameter to one of my manager classes to say, hey, let's go ahead and grab now just deleted customers. Okay? So we do that by, again, grabbing the path in the query from the URL line, and we can then figure out what did they pass in. Okay? So this is just normal stuff that we've always had in web development. So pretty cool. But a way to get some nice, friendly URLs going. Okay? And again, if I bring up that original one, remember I created one on the fly for you, and I said create a brand new web application, it's already given us the route config. It's already given us a place where we can start adding to this. It's already set in the global ASAX here, okay, route config.register route. So all I did was I added it to an existing project just to show you that you don't have to start a brand new application. You can simply, call this from any application just by adding that DLL. Okay. So, in summary, you can see that HTML5 is fully supported in Visual Studio. Okay, the web forms text box supports all the input types. You can use attributes too, you just don't get the IntelliSense. Okay, jQuery, very easy to use with web forms. Okay, again, that client ID mode will really help you out on that. Okay, I'd really highly recommend you start disabling ViewState by default and then just turn it on where you need it. All right, it will make your whole application just a little bit speedier. And then take advantage of those friendly URLs. I mean, why not? It's, it's kind of the way to do things today. You don't have to switch to MVC to get all of this functionality. We have just as fine control over the HTML that's generated from web forms as they do in there. So, keep using what you're familiar with. Don't feel like you have to change. If you want to learn MVC, there are some nice benefits. Another one that I thought I'd mention real quick was unit testing. Well, there's no reason. I've written several articles and blog posts on how to use MVVM, model view model, from web forms. Okay? And then if you have all of your code in a view model, you can unit test. So it takes a little bit of kind of rethinking of how you design things, but you know what? It works just great. And then you can get unit testing with web forms as well. So I'd highly recommend go watch my course at Pluralsight. It's called Building Mobile Websites Using HTML5 and Web Forms. So like I said, we've got all these nice, this one was kind of an overview of the first module there, Modern Web Apps Using Web Forms in Visual Studio. And then I go into using Bootstrap as well. So we talk about how to build horizontal navigation and sidebar navigation with Bootstrap, how to use grids and repeaters and create forms where it displays data. Okay, again, using Bootstrap, and then standard business forms using Bootstrap. And these are all responsive design. all done 100% with web forms. All right, well, I hope everybody enjoyed it. I'm going to answer some questions now and see what you guys have come up with. So I'm sure I got some questions in here. So good question. First question came up was, what about SPA? So single-page applications, can you do that using web forms? Absolutely. Okay. You know, it's a little bit, again, what I would recommend there is turning on that client ID mode equals static. Okay, that will help us a lot. After that, you can definitely drop in Angular or Knockout, whatever you want to use, and build SPAs. Okay, you will then probably want to design some web API, or you could use some WCF services too if you wanted to get data that way. Okay, to bring down into your SPA. And by the way, if you have WCF services already, okay, that are doing XML like SOAP, with just config changes, you can actually modify those to use JSON as well. I wrote an article on this in Code Magazine, I think last year. Might have been a while now, and I wrote an article on how to actually do that, and it'll show you how to convert your WCF services with no extra lines of code or anything, and get back JSON. So somebody asked if I could display the list of browsers. I think I did that one, so I showed you all the ones there. So somebody called me Dr. Paul. That's interesting. Can you still use the technique of client ID with jQuery inside of a .js file? Well, if you remember, JS files go down to the client, right? The client ID is a server-side thing, so no, you're not going to be able to have to do that, okay? You're not going to be able to do that. So, question, will it work with IE9 on the client side? I'm not sure what you mean by will it work. If you're talking about all these techniques, yes. If you're talking about HTML5, HTML5 will simply ignore everything, okay? However, that's where you could look up the tool Modernizer, and then you could use things like jQuery UI to actually do some jQuery shims to make IE9 work with HTML5. So not something that would be out of the realm of possibility, okay? Can the web API with attribute routing be configured to work with web forms? As far as I know, absolutely. I haven't tried that, but I'm pretty sure it will. Okay. For routing to work, is it true your server must be running IIS7 in integrated mode? You know what? I am not 100% sure on that one either. I apologize. I thought it came in 6, but I'm not 100% sure, so I'd have to look that one up. So I'm sorry, you'll have to actually do a little bit of a Google search on that one, Bill. So you have an existing ASP application. Can I automate the generation of the friendly URL? So I'm talking about, I'm assuming you're imagining you got like 500 pages of ASPX pages, and you want to somehow automate, writing that code. You could, but by the time you got done writing that code generator, you could probably just type them all in. So I'm not sure if there's an easy way to do it. Now, you could. That route table is dynamic. You could actually program it dynamically at runtime. So yes, that is possible, if that maybe is what you were talking about. Okay. The question is it easy to add bundling doing this in web forms app? Absolutely. I believe there's a NuGet package for adding bundling as well. If not, simply do what I did and actually bring up a new version of web forms application in Visual Studio 2013 and grab their bundle.config and, of course, any associated DLLs. Now, for that one, you do have to add things like there are some other things you have to do for the bundling. Now, let me look at here. Antler is required for bundling. Okay, Newtonsoft.json is required as well, and WebGrease. So those are 3 things you'll have to add, but I'm pretty sure that is available as a NuGet package. Good question. HTML required property. Okay, so great. So somebody asked you in relation to the HTML required property, does it work with unobtrusive or the .NET validation? So here's what I do, guys. The required property is really a client-side HTML5 thing, okay? The unobtrusive stuff, remember, is kind of generated if you have like the data annotations done on your entity objects. So, and then do they work with .NET validation? Yes, you can have both in there. Okay. In fact, I highly recommend you put both .NET validation controls and the required in there, because that way when you're on an up-level browser, the required will take advantage. But if you're on something like IE9, the .NET validator controls would then work. Okay. Somebody asked if you can reverse engineer routes from destination. You know what? That's been that's a little bit of an issue. You can, but boy, it's a pain in the butt. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, but it is a little bit hard to do. Somebody asked about the eval function. Well, that's just normal data binding that's been there since .NET 1.0 again. Okay. What's my recommendation for websites versus web applications? So if you look at Visual Studio, we don't even have that option anymore, right? So I believe everything now is just a web application, if that's what you're asking. So I can't remember the difference anymore. It's been so long. I've always just done it this way. So I apologize, James. I didn't actually look, and I can't actually remember. So okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? Or I think I answered most of them. Okay. So just looking through some of the other chat things to see if there's anything else. So, but yes, we do have, this is all out of my course that I just published on Pluralsight. It was just released August 29th. Okay. So if you actually go up to pluralsight.com, all right, and you do a search for my name, or actually I think under new releases, yep, it's still here under new releases, building mobile websites using web forms, Bootstrap, and HTML5. Here is the course right here. It's, as I said, 4 hours and 25 minutes. Okay, hey, look at that. I got a great star rating so far. That's cool. Lots of great stuff in here. Like I said, it's all about HTML5, CSS3, jQuery, Bootstrap, all of these, great things for building modern websites. Some really cool stuff. So definitely take the time and check it out. I think you'll find a lot of great stuff if you're still an existing web form developer. You'll find that you don't have to rewrite everything. Okay. Let's see. So, how does controls retain value if ViewState is disabled? Okay. So a lot of the controls, Microsoft actually just built it in. I'm not sure how they do it underneath the hood, but they will actually, some of the controls will and some won't, like I mentioned, right? So not all of them do, so that's where you have to look at them. But things like a text box will automatically maintain without the view state being set. Okay. Some things won't work, like text change. That event would not work without view state being enabled. The selected row in the grid won't work, but everything else will. They're somehow maintaining their state through other means. Okay. So I'm not sure how Microsoft did it, but I believe it's probably through data tags, data attributes that they've added, and some other additional information they're adding right on the control, so it then gets pushed back. But not sure. All right, folks. Well, I think we've covered this one pretty well. I think we'll go ahead and stop it here. We're about 10 minutes early, but that's great. From what I understand, they are going to be recording this, and you'll get the link to this about a week after, if I remember right. So other than that, my name's Paul Sheriff. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me, psheriff@pdsa.com. So psheriff@pdsa.com is my email address, and feel free to hit me up. Other than that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Lindsay from Pluralsight. Thank you.